Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, how can we address domestic violence in our community? Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Mahealani Richardson, your host for tonight's show. For some victims of domestic violence in Hawaii, the pain and shame are kept locked away, not to be reported or discussed. As a community, we have a responsibility to stop a crime that is often hidden. Tonight on Insights, we talk to those who help victims of domestic violence in Hawaii. How do we address domestic violence in our community? We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. And now to our panel. Nancy Creedman is the Chief Executive Officer of the Domestic Violence Action Center, an agency that helps victims of domestic violence. Founded in 1990, it now has a staff of 52 who train, educate, and provide assistance to victims of domestic violence. Keith Kaneshiro is the Honolulu City Prosecutor. He has more than 30 years of experience in criminal justice. His office has been instrumental in launching the Honolulu Family Justice Center, a long-term transitional housing program for victims of domestic violence. Anel Amaral is a former police officer who spent more than a decade as a representative in the State House. She's a member of the Hawaii Paroling Authority, and for more than a decade, she has served as a community liaison for Native Hawaiian concerns to the Garrison Commander, U.S. Army Hawaii. In addition, Ms. Amaral was the Domestic Violence Special Projects Coordinator for the Legal Aid Society of Hawaii. And Senator Roz Baker represents Maui County's 6th District, South and West Maui. She is currently the chairwoman of the Senate Commerce and Consumer Protection Committee. She was part of the Hawaii Women's Legislative Caucus that met with Honolulu Police Chief Louis Kealoha to discuss proper procedure after a Honolulu police sergeant was caught on camera allegedly assaulting his girlfriend. I wanted to thank all of you first for joining us tonight on this very important topic. Ms. Creedman, I wanted to start off with you first because some of the definitions of domestic violence might be confusing to some, or might be they might not know what exactly is domestic violence. So can you give us a definition of what it is?
I'd be happy to. The work that we do is focused on serving survivors who have experienced with an intimate partner a pattern of behavior that includes a number of different kinds of tactics. Maybe isolation, maybe sexual violence, verbal abuse, physical violence, economic abuse. And all of those tactics are designed and used to maintain control over the partner.
So even financial abuse, that's considered domestic violence?
Oh yes, very much so.
Mr. Kaneshiro, you know, people are wondering, why aren't there more convictions out there? You know, we see these high-profile incidents, and why can't we move forward in that regard?
Well, I think it's important that the community understand what domestic violence is all about. What happens is you have to understand the dynamics of domestic violence. You have the victim, and the victim is perceived, or the victim is, in a lot of our cases, uncooperative. The victim is sometimes trapped, and the victim is in fear and don't want to cooperate and testify. The victim is financially dependent on the abuser. And after initially reporting, the victim does not want to testify. Then you have the defendant. You have a defendant, as Nancy said, the abuser is controlling. The whole thing is power and control over the victim.
What about the roles? Is the victim always the victim, and is the perpetrator always the perpetrator, or do the lines get blurred?
Well, there are times when it's the other way around, but the majority of the abuse is from the male abusing the female. That's the majority of it. And once you understand that, then you can see why sometimes it's hard to get convictions, because the third thing you look at is the jury. How does the jury perceive a domestic violence case? And what happens is, when you go to court and try a case, you see the victim who is sitting outside the courtroom with the abuser, hugging each other. They come together, and they apparently got back together Sometimes it's not really true, but it appears to be that way, and the jury sees this. And what happens, the jury will think, why is a prosecutor bringing this kind of case? You know, if the victim does not want to prosecute or is recanting, why are we wasting our time? And it's sitting in a jury trial. But what they need to understand, and what's important, and it's good you have your program, is they need to understand that violence is violence. We're not focusing on the relationship, whether it's good or bad. We're focusing on the conduct. What is the conduct? What happened? And whether the conduct violated the law. And
Senator Baker, let's talk about the Sergeant Cachola incident where the public saw this really graphic video of what looked like a police officer beating up on his girlfriend. And then there was this legislative meeting to look at this. What did you learn out of that meeting?
Actually, we didn't have the meeting with the chief to look at that particular instance, but we had it to look at the entire range of the policies that are in place, the training that's in place, what happens when the alleged perpetrator is an HPD officer. That was a key element. And how does the police respond? How can the community be assured that everything is going to be done appropriately and that there's not going to be favoritism because it might have been an officer or somebody that they knew? So there were a lot of questions, and we really didn't even want to look at the tape. We didn't want to be engaged in that because we were looking at the larger policy and system issues that really were at play and in risk because there seemed to be gaps. There didn't seem to be a really good set of procedures and processes in place. And we felt like that those really needed to be addressed. That's why we wanted to meet with the chief.
And do you think that any legislation will come out of this meeting?
I'm certain that there will. We had an informational briefing after we met with the chief, and other things were identified, some of the concerns by people that do prosecute or do work with victims. And so we found some areas, training gaps, reporting. Things that start out as domestic violence don't end up in the statistics as domestic violence. So we don't really have a good sense of how large an issue it is. The policies and procedures are very opaque. People cannot get to them. There are instances where people would want to make complaints, but maybe they have to get it notarized, and that gets to be a barrier. So I think we want to look at how police are trained. Is there oversight for all of the processes? Because we found out in the hearing that the police commission really doesn't have any oversight over conduct of officers. And how is the department going to handle that, manage that? I think there's a lot of questions, and I would imagine that we're looking at other states. Are there other best practices? Would it have been important if they'd had a body camera on? Then you wouldn't have to worry about whether the reports were done in sufficient detail. You know, there's a record that needs to be made in all of these cases, and sometimes without being very detailed, the officers may miss something that's critical down the road that might be useful to Mr. Kaneshiro and his office.
Ms. Amaral, do you think that HPD did enough in this particular situation?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, the way I heard it was the officers arrived, greeted their sergeant, and when they left without filing a report. They essentially did what's called a file number, which means in 30 days it's disposed of. There's no criminal activity. So no, the officers did not do sufficient work.
Ms. Creedman, in this particular situation, the girlfriend, you know, when it came out in the media, she said that they were just sparring, you know, doing some sort of, you know, playing behind the scenes. What did you make of that statement?
Well, I think it's a difficult position for her to be in, under the public scrutiny, the spotlight, for her to explain what was taking place between her and her lover is challenging and embarrassing. And she understandably was reluctant to talk about it and disclose it for the community's judgment. I think, again, I think what Mr. Kaneshiro said about the community deepening its understanding about the complexity of domestic violence and the nuances and the need for the system to work together in approaching and addressing and resourcing and sustaining a good response is key to the community's effectiveness in addressing domestic violence.
Yeah. Mr. Kaneshiro, do you have a response to that?
Well, I think the work that what Nancy does in educating the public is very important. I think that's what needs to do. The attitude of the public has to change about domestic violence. Now, let me refer to what Anel said about this particular case. When the police responded to the scene, it was a 911 call. The call was not on a domestic violence issue. The call was to remove a customer from the restaurant. And so the police went there, and then there was an argument. So what they did was to remove the customer from the restaurant. And after the customer was removed from the restaurant, the next day, the friends of the so-called victim got the video and released the video. And that's how it became public that there was some incident that occurred before the police arrived. But the police who responded did not know of this, what happened before. Now, I think what Anel said, which is important, is the police should have filed a report of whatever they did, even if it wasn't, they didn't know about the domestic violence. They should have filed a report that they went to this and removed this irate customer who did not want to leave. The public needs to understand in this particular situation that when you have a victim that's reluctant and does not report, so you don't know whether the violence occurred. And even after they saw the video, the victim still refused to say that any violence occurred. And not only that, all the other people, the other witnesses there also said that there was no violence, there was no assault. They were playing around. All the other witnesses, and some people did not want to talk. So that's why we took the action of going to the grand jury to put everyone there under oath, testify under oath so we could find out what really happened. And sure enough, some of them decide to say, no, well, initially we said they were playing, but when we looked at it, it seemed like he was punching her. And that was presented to the grand jury. So that's the reason why we went to grand jury, to put people under oath, and because people were reluctant. And once you bring reluctant witnesses, they have to testify.
Incredibly difficult. Go ahead.
So the advantage to the skill of the police officer is they know how to conduct an investigation. They know how to ask questions. So the advantage to the officers to conducting an investigation, taking statements at that time, is you get the spontaneous utterance. You get what is happening immediately. Later, when people calm down, or then the mind changes and the conditions change, and then their statements change. That's why you send the police into that scene. They get it when everything is in place and spontaneous. So the officers in this particular case do no service whatsoever by simply walking out, not filing a report.
Senator Baker, last question on this particular topic. Were you satisfied after your meeting with the chief?
No.
Why not?
Because I wasn't convinced that all of the folks in the room that were representing law enforcement really had as good an understanding as I would hope they have in terms of why it's important to take the reports, why it's important for the police to be above reproach in terms of their conduct. I think there was some understanding, but I think perhaps not enough depth to know that there is a culture in some parts of law enforcement that needs to be addressed. And that's an education process, that's a learning process, that's an understanding that there are some gaps in their procedures that need to be fixed. And just telling us that you're going to provide training and then to find out that the training is online and maybe it's only on the honor system, maybe it's an hour's worth. that really doesn't go towards addressing how people should be dealing with a situation as difficult to deal with as domestic violence is.
And that brings up an interesting question from Mike, a very simple question. What can the public do when they suspect domestic violence? Ms. Creedman.
Well, we would like them to express concern to the person. For example, I was at the Metro Rotary this morning at 7:15 for a breakfast conversation, and one of the members in the audience was talking about his neighbors. And I'm tempted to knock on the door of my neighbors when I hear something going on and say, I hear something's going on, stop it. And we have to caution people that that is probably not the best response, but perhaps a private conversation with her at some other point, saying, I'm concerned about your safety. So that's one thing the public can do, is that they can recognize, they can observe, they can reach out, they can offer resource numbers, they can educate themselves, they can bring people like all of us to their civic clubs or to their churches or to their academic institutions, to their workplaces, to help everybody understand so that we're all raising our awareness and responding more
It's such a difficult subject to approach, especially, I mean, I personally can think of maybe just a handful of people who I know might be involved in some sort of domestic violence situation, and these are people who come from good families, they've got jobs, and they're our neighbors and our friends. So how do you have that conversation with someone?
With love and grace and good intention, no judgment, and a willingness to hear the answer. Now, it is a delicate conversation, no question. You don't have to be an expert. Everybody is not an expert in it. But if you express your concern and offer support and know that the person is going to do what they're going to do. I mean, you and I might do completely different things in the same situation. That's my life's path, that's your life's path. So I have to accept what you're going to do, but I want you to know I care about your well-being and your safety and your harm and your risk and your danger.
And then make sure that they have the
information,
the statewide hotline, know where the resources are in the community, know that there are people that are willing to assist them if they want to take that step.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's enough. You know, I noticed on some of our college campuses in the women's bathrooms are numbers that you can call if you believe you're a victim of domestic violence. And it's just making that information available in almost an anonymous way so that when that individual is ready to reach out, they know how to do it.
Ms. Creedman, what is that number? And go ahead and repeat it a couple times.
Well, the number for our agency is 531-3771. That's the Domestic Violence Action Center. The local shelter number is, this is Oahu now, 841-0822. Senator Baker might have a Maui number.
I'm not really good with telephone numbers.
You know, I'm sure they can call your office.
Yes, we can get that.
They can call the Hawaii State Coalition Against Domestic Violence for a full directory of resources.
You know, when we talk about resources, one of the resources that your office is working on is transitional housing. Can you talk about that, and where is it in the process?
Well, the transitional housing came out of the concept of you can provide services, but one of the problems with the victims is they have nowhere to go. Some of them are afraid. Some of them rely on the income or the financial aspect of the abuses, so they don't want to leave. So they won't report, or if they report, they recant. So what we wanted to do was provide a place where the victims can come to, they can live, stay there for 2 years. We can have them there. We can, so they can, testify against the abusers, and there won't be repercussions because you'll be safe. We'll provide job training so they can become independent. They can support themselves, and they can work on their self-esteem if need be. They can have counseling. But this is a Honolulu Family Justice Center, which is in a process. We've just signed a purchase sale agreement for a 20-unit apartment complex. This was funded by the city. Funded at, we got the funds of $6.2 million. The sale was for $5.5 million. And once the it clears escrow, then we have to do renovations to improve the security of that facility, and we will have victims living there and providing a safe place for them. It's a whole concept of bringing them in a safe place so they don't have to worry about the financial aspect. They don't have to worry about any danger of somebody having taking repercussions against them, mostly the abusers.
Ms. Amaral, from your experience in talking to the community, do a lot of people feel like there's just no hope, there's no avenue for them to turn to?
I'm not so sure that people feel there isn't help. It's, I think, more, the response I hear more often than not is, you don't understand my situation. I mean, my situation is unique and very different from everybody else's, you know. It's interesting in the Hawaiian community. I mean, my background has always been one of a woman's advocate, and I've been involved in issues of sex assault as well as issues of domestic violence. And when I started working with the Hawaiian civic clubs and participating in conventions and things, I started to bring issues of domestic violence and sex assault to those discussions with Hawaiians. And
what are the cultural differences in terms of how Native Hawaiians or other cultures look at domestic violence?
Well, clearly, one of the things I was told is this is not a Hawaiian issue. This is a Haole issue. This is not a Hawaiian issue. Since when? You know, it's,
well, what it is when you have children witnessing the parents resorting to violence to resolve things, they adopted that that's the way you respond to differences. So you perpetuate the violent culture. So, and violence is not limited to a particular race or a particular family. It's all over the place.
Yes.
But violence is wrong. And the community need to know that violence is wrong. And domestic violence is not a private matter. It's a public matter. And we need to address it.
Violence is glorified. Go to the movies, listen to lyrics of music.
Yeah.
I mean, we sensationalize violence as a way to get power, to get your message across, to do what you want. So it happens in the context of a culture which glorifies and lifts up. This is the way you get what you want. This is what you get. This is what you do if you need something. So it isn't limited to one cultural community or ethnic community. In your opening remark, you said this sees no boundaries in age, culture, education, socioeconomic class. So the recognition that that's the case really has to be embraced by our community.
Right. Ms. Amaral, you know, if you feel that the Native Hawaiian community has a certain view of domestic violence, how do you teach people in a different way from, let's say, other communities?
Yes, well, certainly we have to first start with talking about it, you know, sitting down and actually talking through what is our perception with respect to hitting and using physical force in order to control people. And why is that appropriate? And eventually you get to the point where it really is about, this is the way I was raised, and so this is the way I act. So can we come up with other forms then of settling differences without the hitting? And let's start with the children, you know, and let's work our way through to intimate partners. When it comes to, I think, dealing with the Hawaiian community in issues of intimate partner abuse, the community, Hawaiians are communal people. And when we want to solve problems, we want to do it as a community. Okay? So it's not just a matter of treating the survivor of domestic violence. It's treating the children and the extended family, and grandma and grandpa and aunties and uncles, and more often than not, the betterer as well. You know, it's the healing of everyone.
I just want to add to that, if I might. The law enforcement system, the criminal justice system, is not necessarily the best formula for everybody. And so if we're talking about a community response, we really have to recognize that everybody doesn't necessarily want the police involved. Maybe they want to resolve it in their family or in their community or in their church. So we just have to make sure that our communities or our churches or whoever is sufficiently equipped to provide support, give information about resources. That also could account for why people recant or don't cooperate in law enforcement investigations. One of the programs that we have at the Domestic Violence Action Center is working out on the Leeward Coast, specifically with Filipino and Native Hawaiian families, to inspire discussion about community-driven solutions, because the law enforcement and criminal justice system isn't for everyone.
What do you think about that, Mr.
Yeah, I agree with her. The criminal justice system is not the answer for everything. But somehow people, every time there's a problem, they refer to the criminal justice system. You know, some of the abusers, maybe if they go to a program with anger management, learn how to control that. You can stop the lead. So we're looking at a program where if they're first-time offenders and it's not a severe assault or anything, we sort of work out, well, what do we give them a deal so they can go to anger management, and then we can monitor, they can be under supervision of the court. But preferably if we cannot have the cases come before, but I'm not saying that they shouldn't. If there is violence involved, it should be reported so we can address it. And they will, and not everybody who's prosecuted go to jail. Yeah. Everybody thinks that if you're prosecuted, you're going to go to jail. Some we can refer for supervision, and they can be monitored. They can go to programs, not only for the victims, but also for the defendants. There are programs for them.
Let's talk about the Peter Poikema case. You know, recently come to light that police on the Big Island have some new evidence, and after, 17 years, the public waiting for so long for closure to this case. Ms. Creedman, what do you make of what's happening, and why can't we move forward with this case?
I don't have the most current information about the case.
Senator Baker, do you have any thoughts on the case? Just from your perspective as a lawmaker.
Actually, no, because when we've been dealing with domestic violence, at least, we've mostly been looking at intimate partner violence and not child abuse and neglect. And clearly this was one of the most egregious forms of child abuse, because it ended up in the death of this young boy. And while there were some interventions by some of the state workers, ostensibly, so it's very complicated, and I don't know what the police has, and I'm hopeful that because it's been such a long period of time, that if we looked at our child welfare response today compared to back then, that we would have found lots of changes and made adjustments and improvements over the system so that we wouldn't have that kind of situation again. But I think, you know, as we've mentioned earlier, it really is about starting conversations in the community, helping with parenting classes. You know, you can be a parent at a very early age and have really no training or understanding of what you're getting yourself into. So trying to prevent some of that, and then helping the new moms or helping families that may be at risk, so that you never get into the situation that brought about the Peter Boy situation.
What do prosecutors, at least on this island, think about what's going on the Big Island?
We don't comment on what's going on the Big Island. And the reason why is because we don't really know all the facts involved. We don't know what new evidence they're looking at or anything. So it's best not to comment. And I usually don't comment on things that we have, we don't have all the facts. As Nancy said, it's hard to comment because you don't know what facts, and you don't want to give out false, information out there.
Well, tonight we're talking with advocates and elected officials about how we address domestic violence in our community. And we invite you to join the conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. You can call 973-1000 on Oahu and 800-283-4847 from the neighbor islands. Lori from Aiea brings up the Ray Rice case, and Ray Rice's girlfriend, this NFL case, huge publicity, and all of a sudden we see the girlfriend defending
his wife,
the wife
now.
Yeah, the wife now, now wife, defending this guy and being his biggest supporter. Ms. Creedman, can you explain the psychology behind that?
Oh, definitely. Again, this woman is being asked in front of the entire country what took place between her and her husband. There is the implicit judgment that there's something wrong with her. She was assaulted so badly. If she were to say anything, I mean, this would be my fear. If she were to say anything, she's putting herself at risk of more assault, more humiliation, the loss of his career. I mean, he's about on the precipice of maybe a new contract. There's a lot of shame in being a victim. For everybody to have seen what happened to her and played dozens and dozens and dozens of times. I've had women say to me, you know, when I've told somebody that I'm a survivor of domestic violence, I can see that they think about me in a different way. People hold judgments about other people, and that's one of the reasons why people keep it a secret.
Ms. Amaral, you know, there's a decision for the victim. You know, let's say if I leave, I might lose my kids, I might lose my source of income, I don't have a family. What can you say to empower people out there to make that really difficult step forward and maybe leave a situation that is not the best for them?
Yeah, I think what we can say is, I'm here to support whatever decision you make. I'm not going to make that decision for you, but I'm here to support whatever decision you make. And if we are family to a survivor of domestic violence, hopefully we leave ourselves open enough to hear what they're going through and to support them in the place that they're in and not impose our will. I mean, in Hawaiian families, it's often, you know, what do you mean you're leaving him? This is a nice guy. You know, he's taking good care of you. What did you do wrong? You know, all these judgments suddenly get imposed on her. So what we try to do is instead advise families to just support her in the place she's in right now and in whatever decision is right for her. We can't be in that place.
Well, and that's the reason why we have the Family Justice Center. We have an alternative. She can move out. She don't have to worry about finance. She can move out. She can move away from that environment of violence and threat and go into another place where people will take care of her and be aware that it won't be threatened. Now, the thing about the Ray Rice case and what Nancy pointed out is very important. And one of the things about the Ray Rice case that when it came out is it brought to light nationally the problem of domestic violence and the discussion of domestic violence.
So we're talking about it right now.
That's right.
Exactly, yes.
And that's you know, I hate to say it, but it's a good thing that came out of this particular case. The other thing is, if you saw the video, that one punch, and you be hearing court, well, he only punched her one time, so what's the problem?
Yeah.
Well, did you see that one punch that he punched her and just practically knocked her out? That's another issue. Okay? Then you see what kind of violence is involved. And the third thing is, well, she attacked him first. Well, does that give him the right to punch her? You know, do you charge her with assault? We wouldn't charge her with assault. We charge him with assault. But that's the other thing that, you know, these are all things that the jury considers. They look at, wow, it's her fault. She started it. She provoked it. But, you know, violence, when you have a violence of a male against female, you can't compare it to the punch of a female to a punch of a male. And this is what this case showed.
Is Senator Baker, is legislation really the answer for some of this? Because, you know, let's say in the heat of that moment, I don't think either side will be thinking about laws, legislation, that sort of thing. I mean, they're in the middle of something.
Sometimes you have to have that policy framework that allows victims to be taken care of, that puts programs in place for batterers, that makes places safe, whether it's through a TRO or temporary restraining order or some other mechanism that tries to balance the equation, because it's a power problem, and women more often than not are at the short end of that power equation. And so sometimes, yes, you do have to have laws. Now, no, in the heat of the moment, they're not going to be thinking about that. But after because of appropriations that maybe the legislature makes to Women Helping Women or Nancy's organizations or others, there are things in the community, there are programs in the community, there are safe places in the community that people can go to. I think the statistics show that after a TRO is filed is probably the most vulnerable time a victim of battering has in terms of additional battering or something worse. But that's why we keep trying to strengthen the laws that give police the power, if they're called and somebody is walking through that TRO, that they can enforce a cooling off period. If there's guns or ammunition in the home, they can take that away. We just passed that law a couple of years ago.
Yeah, the legislature have been very responsive to the problem of domestic violence. If you look way back, we never had a crime called abuse of a household member. We had to do a charge of assault or harassment. And abuse of a household member conviction mandates 40 hours in jail. So it shows the seriousness of that particular crime. And the legislature was the one who did that. And the legislature was the one who just last year passed a law. If you commit domestic violence in the presence of someone who's 17 years old and under, children, then that's a felony.
I think it's 14. 14 or 17?
17.
Oh, 17?
17.
I thought it was 14.
You know, Ms. Amaral, there's a lot of parents out there,
yes.
and you know the lines get blurred. But is there a difference for you in talking about this issue? The difference between properly punishing your child, and then there's people talk about spanking, and then there's domestic violence. I mean, where is that line?
Or here you're talking about child abuse. So there's the scolding, and then the hitting, and then you cross the line, and now you're abusing a child. Where is the line crossed? See, in my head, it's pretty clear that when you inflict severe pain on a child, you can tell because of the bruising, and because of the weeping, and because of the bleeding, possibly. You've crossed the line. It's time to stop. I wish that we could spend more time working with children on alternative ways of solving conflicts, and that you don't have to repeat what your mom and dad did to you, that you can teach them from young another way to resolve a conflict and not to hit. I wish we could stop parents from hitting kids, quite frankly.
Ms. Green, go ahead.
I just want to, if I might, I think we don't want to leave your audience, our audience, with the belief that domestic violence or intimate partner violence only happens in families where there was violence that the person grew up with, because that is simply not the case. There are many people who grew up in homes where there was no violence and found themselves being victimized by an intimate partner. So I just kind of want to be clear about that. And then the other thing I wanted to offer is leaving is the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence, not the filing of a TRO. So even if you haven't filed a TRO, but you've made the decision to leave or you've taken steps to leave, that increases the risk. Most women who have been killed in the act of leaving.
Let me get back to parental discipline. There's a question of what is parental discipline. And we have prosecuted a case where when the parent used a bat to hit the child, and the person was convicted, went to the courts, and the courts said there was parental discipline and reversed the conviction. So there is some kind of blur of the line by the courts. For us, we pretty much clear about what is parental discipline and what is not. So we introduced a bill in the legislature that sort of described conduct if you use a bat, if you use some instrument to hit your child, that is not parental discipline, that is an abuse. So we need to make it clear. But the courts have been ruling a lot on parental discipline and giving the parents the discretion.
You know, Lauren from Kailua wanted to know more about the financial manipulation, because that's something you don't really hear about, financial manipulation. Ms. Creedman, can you explain a little bit more about that, and what are the resources for someone in that particular situation, which is domestic violence?
Yes. Well, maybe the title to all the property is in the husband or partner's name. Maybe all of the money available for groceries or gas or shopping has to be allotted by the person in control, the person with the power in the relationship. Maybe the credit cards are all in the name of one of the partners and not the other. Maybe the odometer on the car is monitored to see how much driving or gas was used during the day. It's any of the decisions made related to family finances or economic issues are made by the person with the power in the relationship. So those are some descriptions of financial abuse. We help all of our domestic violence programs statewide. We'll help anybody suffering any of the forms of abuse that we talked about earlier. It would be hard to convict in a court of law, but there are resources and there are avenues for supporting victims who don't have access to their family's assets or resources.
Well, one of the reasons that we passed, I think it was Act 205 a couple of years ago, was so that employers wouldn't inadvertently re-victimize victims who had a job, needed that job, but because there is such a stigma of being a victim of domestic violence and being concerned that the batterer was going to come to the workplace and create problems, that you would all of a sudden have a victim who needed that job, needed that security, not have it. So I think that's one way that the legislature recognized that you have this unequal relationship that can turn around finances.
What do you think have been the outcomes of at least that particular piece of legislation?
Well, it was landmark legislation. We were the first state in the country to put that into place, and it actually, the impetus behind it happened in my district, where there was a woman who had been helped by Women Helping Women to get a TRO. She had asked her boss at her place of work, could she receive information faxed from the court and then send it back, and got that permission. But then after, I guess, the manager thought about what he might be involving the business in, decided no, that he could not afford to keep her. She had a stellar record in terms of coming to work and comments and evaluations, but she was terminated simply because she was a victim of domestic violence.
Ms. Amaral, Frank from Maui wants to know, how can you build community trust when leaders, meaning law enforcement, can't be charged?
Can't be charged.
Cannot be charged.
Why can't they be charged?
They can. We have charged. We have charged many
police officers,
not only with abuse of household member, but other crimes. But if there's evidence, we have charged police officers. The problem is the victims don't want to come forward because then they realize that a police officer might lose their job, they lose their retirement, they lose all the benefits, and the victim would lose that also. But we have charged. We have not hesitated to charge.
Unlike any other job, the police officer, if a restraining order is filed against him, automatically is going to lose his job because he cannot carry a firearm if a restraining order is against him. And his wife or his partner knows that and so is reluctant then to file charges against him because now we don't have an income coming in like that. But
and then we go back to that same, that you're going to, you know, there's a fear that you'll lose everything. Ms. Creeman, you had something to add.
Well, I was just going to say that we worked with the Honolulu Police Department last year on developing some training and policy and recommendations for the department to consider related to officer-involved domestic violence, so that the department has an understanding of how unique it is for the officer to be the abuser in a situation, and to train their peers, their colleagues, in responding appropriately and effectively, and training everybody to understand that this is a crime that we take seriously. If there are red flags, you must respond, and the chain of command has to become involved. Outreach has to be done to the partners. I mean, it might even be that the officer is the victim. and the abuser is not. So I mean, we have to continue developing dialogue with the police department, and that is also one of the good outcomes from the unfortunate circumstances that we've experienced here locally, is that we've begun conversations with the Honolulu Police Department that we haven't had in quite a long time.
So
that's essential. I mean,
so
we're
there was
working
an
together.
Incident, at least people are talking and now
Yeah.
meeting face to face.
Yeah, we're working together towards the same goal, which is safety in our community.
Senator Baker, do you see another meeting with the police chief at any time in regards to these issues, or do you think that it might take another firework again to get talking?
I hope not. You know, I think the police is making some attempts to meet some of the concerns that we had. I think there will be legislation, and so obviously we'll be seeing some of the folks from the department, and hopefully we'll be able to work with them in crafting some of the legislation, because it is something that we want to have all of the stakeholders engaged in. And I've sort of learned over the years that if you don't try to meet people halfway and involve them in the process, then you're not going to get the outcome that you desire, because they still have the power to enforce the law or not enforce the law. What we can do is shine the light, try to bring them to the table, get people to work together and move it forward. And we've made some specific requests of the police department, and I have good confidence that they're going to be meeting us halfway with, more than halfway with those concerns that we have.
I've also made requests to the police department that every patrol officer should be equipped with a camera. And the reason why is the patrol officers are the first to respond to a call of domestic violence. And it's the initial officer who goes there who's going to get the evidence that's going to allow us to convict. And none of it is, we need the pictures. We need the pictures of the injuries. We need the pictures of how the scene is. We need for them to interview witnesses. So we're telling them to train the patrol officers at Police Academy as to how to investigate domestic violence, not just on a 1 hour training.
Yes.
Right. Let's talk about pictures, because you know we're in an age of social media. There's video cameras and security cameras everywhere. You know, what's the reality, Ms. Creedman, in terms of how much domestic violence, you know, what are the rates? Because it seems as though, because of social media, it's everywhere now.
It's not our impression that the crime of domestic violence has increased, but rather reporting has increased, and access to imagery and information has increased. I think Senator Baker said earlier, we don't have a good system here where statistics are captured. So we don't have an accurate sense of how big a problem it is, how costly a problem it is, to whom it impacts, what kinds of resources are available. I mean, I can tell you what we do at the Domestic Violence Action Center. Mr. Kaneshiro can tell you what his office does. The police department can tell you a little bit about what they do. Women Helping Women can tell you what they do. But we don't have a statewide picture. We don't have a city and county picture. That would be enormously helpful in terms of planning, resource allocation, development, and program evaluation. Like, are these programs working? How many people are we being able to meet? What kinds of needs do they have? We don't have a good system for that.
And why not? Senator Baker.
Partly because a crime that starts out as a domestic violence call can end up being listed as a property crime. It could be listed as harassment. It could be listed as a whole lot of other things, and so you don't get the statistics. Part of it is how the federal justice system asks for information to be recorded and accumulated. So what we're trying to figure out how we can, without overburdening any system, get the flags that are there. If it starts out as domestic violence, no matter how it might end up, that tag goes along with the reporting, and so we have a way of capturing whether it was, you know, some other kind of, you know, God forbid it was murder or a beating or an assault, but to know that that was the call that and that relationship, that intimate partner relationship, is flagged as it goes through, because I think that would give us a clearer picture, and then we might be able to make a better case that, particularly for officer-involved situations, if they had that camera on, it would be actually help them from being accused, because they would have all of the information at the scene. You would know what went on. The camera doesn't lie. You don't have to start it or stop it. And it makes reporting a lot easier. And I think it would give people in the community who may be a little hesitant to know that it is going to be fully reported, it's going to be fully investigated, no matter who arrives at the scene.
You know, Mr. Kaneshiro, as one of our listeners wants to know, what are the specific laws on the books right now? Because it is a complicated issue, and there's so many different venues that you can look at it.
Well, the more direct one is abuse of household member, which is a misdemeanor. Is if you abuse or if you assault anyone who lives within a house, so whether you're married to the person, if the boyfriend and girlfriend living together, that's an abuse of household member. But there are other crimes, as Senator Baker pointed out, like terroristic threatening, attempted murder, assault first degree. Sometimes when the assault escalates to a serious injury, then it's classified as not abuse of household member, it's classified as an assault second or assault first, which is a felony, Class B and C felony. So there are a lot of other categories of crime that domestic violence will fall under, like even the property crimes. The wife is accusing the husband, you know, you stole my property, you know, so you call the police. But actually it's domestic violence, domestic dispute going on, but the crime that's reported is a theft. So there's a lot of other crimes.
You know, January is Stalking Awareness Month.
Yes.
Stalking is a huge problem. Half of all the clients on our caseload in all of our programs are stalked by their abusers. And there's lots of different ways to stalk somebody. You could show up, you could cyber stalk them, you could make repeated phone calls, you can arrive at their house and do something to change the canned goods in the cabinet, and she knows the partner was there. I mean, there's many ways that you can let somebody know that you're being watched or you're being followed. And that's a very terrifying experience for a person.
It's psychological abuse. Yeah. That's what people don't see, psychological abuse.
You know, one viewer just called in, and this is a woman from Kaka'ako, and she wants to know about isolation abuse. My friend's boyfriend is trying to isolate her and get rid of all her friends of 20 years to keep all to himself. Ms. Amaral, can you talk about this situation?
Yes, that happens.
And this person is listening, so what would you tell this person, this woman?
I would offer to this person that they may want to call an agency like the Domestic Violence Hotline or something like that, you know, to just talk through what they're going through and maybe get some advice. But that is very much the starting point of domestic violence, of maintaining power and control over you. So that if we isolate you, and you can't tell your friends what's happening, you only rely on your partner then for support, then your world gets much stronger and his power gets much bigger, you know. So what I would encourage her to do is, if she no longer has friends that she can talk to, or she doesn't feel comfortable to do that, at least call the DV hotline and talk to a counselor that's skilled in this issue.
Ms. Creedman, if you were talking to this woman from Kaka'ako, what would you tell her?
The woman who's calling, it's her friend who's being isolated, is that right? She might mention,
my friend's boyfriend is trying to isolate her.
She might mention her concern to her friend, give her some examples. Again, it's all about letting somebody know that you notice something is occurring and that you're concerned about it. And when she's ready for some help, I'll be there to support you. Leaving is not easy, or changing a relationship is not easy. We're sort of pretending that the system works great And anybody who finally arrives at the place where they want to go, they can go. We're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about childcare, we're talking about religion, we're talking about family pressure, we're talking about economics, we're talking about a lot of moving parts. So the complexity cannot be diminished.
You know, is there any, we have about a minute left in this panel, but is there any one bit of hope that any one of you can give me before we go?
Well, I think the hope is that the community is talking about it, and people are sharing their stories and coming out and asking for support and help, and that there are resources in the community to do that. You know, we've been working with the university to try to make sure that that's a safe place, that, you know, it's not domestic violence, it's sex assault, but it's the same concept. It's a power, it's an attempt to control someone or to take something from someone. And I think the more that we talk about it, the more that we put policies, procedures, structures, programs in place, resources in place, the more optimistic we can be that we're going to get a handle on this very debilitating blight on our society.
And we're going to end on at least that hopeful note, but thank you to all of you for being here tonight on this extremely important topic. Hopefully that there can be action after tonight's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, next time on Insights, having a job in Hawaii doesn't always guarantee a roof over your head and food on your table. Some of Hawaii's working poor are families just one step away from homelessness, while others head to jobs after a night of sleeping in shelters or on the sidewalk. On the next Insights, how we can help Hawaii's working poor. That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Mahealani Richardson. Ahui ho. Thank you, all of you. Thank you.
Go from one sad topic to another.